Idaho started the transfer to primacy some time ago. The first bill that was passed oops, sorry, I gotta go back. The first bill was passed 2014. In July 1st, 2021 is when Idaho officially took over. They adopted the federal permit at that time. And so that's what we've been operating under until this year. Idaho has been doing, the DEQ has been doing construction site inspections with the EPA, without the EPA for several years now. The e-permitting site that the DEQ uses started back in July, and this new CGP became effective on February 10th of this year. So that's where we're at. And so I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the new CGP, but first, this is the first page you see on the DEQ's permitting site. We have 60 days from the effective date to file a new NOI for existing projects to refile or renew those. That means before April 11, 2022, all those existing projects have to be filed. The DEQ system to file an NOI, what seems to trip people up is there's really 3 steps, and I'm not going to go very deep into these, but you register for an account, and then the DEQ verifies that, and then you have permission to log back in, and then you register the facility. So it's kind of confusing to a lot of people. The facility is the construction site. So you would, that's your facility. You submit that, then your facility is accepted, and then you log back in and say, for this facility, I want to file an NOI. And so it's really a 3-step process. It's not all at once. Sometimes takes, the DEQ's been a lot faster than they were in July and August and stuff. So they're getting these processed faster, but still it's not a one and done. File your NOI and you're done. And another thing about Idaho is that there's fees for filing NOI. Like, I know it's that way in every other state. And so a lot of people are used to this, but in Idaho, a lot of people are terribly confused. They have to pay a fee because we were under the federal system, and so we never paid a fee. And so this is the fees. In the construction general permit are the fees for the CGP, and there's an annual renewal, which is pretty minimal, to be honest. These are pretty low fees compared to the surrounding states. So anyway, that's the NOI process doesn't start. Your 14 days doesn't start until it's finally signed and the fee is paid, which is pretty new in this state. So about the new CGP, I'm going to talk about some things that I felt were changes. They kind of just clarify stuff we were already doing. Most people were doing anyways, how it was interpreted by the EPA in the 2017 permit. There's a few things that were removed that aren't really requirements anymore. Pretty small, but there are a few. And then there's some things that I felt they weren't really clarifications. They're just changes, but just specificity. And then new things like that were added to the permit here in Idaho. So that's how I'm going to go through, is talk about these things in this order. And maybe you found some more things, but this is what I could find. Tried to make a decent summary of each one of those. So first, clarifications. It uses permit language related to water quality. For example, in this section, you have to include specific controls and procedures designed to ensure that your use of cationic treatment chemicals will not lead to a discharge that does not meet the water quality standard. So the new permit talks about the water quality standard quite often. There's a whole bunch. I didn't list them all in the interest of time, but they what they mean by the water quality standard is the Idaho DEQ has a state water quality standard. It's in the IDAPA rules, IDAPA rules, and those they're listed in that document. And so there's a lot of places where it says you'll meet the state water quality standards, and it seems like already I've been getting a lot of questions here at work about, like, what does this mean? What is the state water quality standard and stuff? So that's what it's referring to. And so largely related to treatment chemicals, but other things, discharges, you're not supposed to violate the state water quality standard. Another clarification, they added to prohibited discharges that there was 5 prohibited discharges and now there's 6. So I'm assuming that everybody here kind of knows what was in the old CGP. So I'm not going to go too much into what all those are, but they added a prohibited discharge. So that's dewatering water discharged from contaminated sites. And then it defines contaminated sites as subject to existing remediation activities like a Superfund, circular RCRA site. So if you know that's that kind of a site, then you're prohibited from dewatering and discharging that water. That would be an individual permit most likely, and isn't really covered by the construction general permit. So I think that's kind of a clarification, because it's not like that was allowed before, but it wasn't really written in the permit this clearly. So other one, the perimeter control must be installed in upgrading of any natural buffers. There was a little bit of confusion in the old permit where it talked about perimeter controls and then it had examples, and one of the examples was a vegetative filter strip. And so there were several, I guess I talked to several people that say, well, I have this natural buffer, and so that's my vegetative filter strip, so I don't need a perimeter control. It just wasn't clear, but that wasn't the case. And so they clarified by saying that the perimeter control has to be installed upgrading of the natural buffer. So you have to have the natural buffer plus a perimeter control. I think that in the EPA's 2017 permit, they intended it to be that way, but it just was designed, or the way that it was written, and then some footnotes kind of made it like, oh, wait, I have a natural buffer, and so I don't need the perimeter control, which wasn't true, but now it's clarified. The other thing, the old permit said that stockpiles that contain soil had to meet these stockpile requirements. And so the question was, well, what if they don't contain soil? What does that mean? And so they clarified, and this is true in the new EPA permit too. There's a clarification statement that's not exactly the same, but similar. But it says these requirements do not apply to the storage of rock, such as riprap, landscape rock, pipe bedding, gravel, boulders. Obviously, there's still a line there. Like the photograph, is that road base? Is it rock? Like what, so there's still a gray area there, but at least it's a little bit clearer where, yeah, this doesn't apply to clean rock, but it does apply to stockpiles that contain soil. So they did some clarifications for multi-day rain events. I guess the old permit just wasn't very clear on this. Now it's I don't know. I think they did a good job of clarifying it. I didn't quote the permit because it was too lengthy, but basically you receive a 1/4 inch of rain, you have to do an inspection. If you receive a 1/4 inch of rain within 24 hours, you do an inspection. After that 1/4 inch is received, the rain could be going for several days. And if you receive more than another 1/4 inch of rain after that initial 1/4 inch, then you can wait until the end of the storm event and do one more inspection called a post-rain event inspection. So that's what they clarified. And the old permit didn't really, it was a little vague on like what to do. Do you just keep doing an inspection after every single 1/4 inch? How's that work? That's not, I think it's a lot more clear now. They also clarified, I think that this was obvious from the old permit, but they specifically stated that you have to update the SWPPP maps when you do the inspection. So, and I think that's a good clarification. Good way to go. Should help, I guess. They also clarified that several places in the Idaho permit say that you can use electronic forms, electronic inspection reports, as long as it can be viewed on the job site, just like you're reviewing a copy on the job site. I included this. I think that this one works. I put the new QR code, but I've found that a lot of people I work with have a hard time finding the Idaho CGP in the website. So if you want to snapshot this, or it'll show up on the YouTube channel in a few days, you can use it to find the permit. So anyway, that's something that we've been using is QR codes to reference electronic documents so that they can be found quickly on a job site. Clarifications. It clarified that the corrective action reporting can be done with like a log form. And this is really similar to the EPA's permit as well. that you don't have to have like stacks of report after report. It can be done in a log, and basically save some time and easier to keep track of corrective actions. Also consolidated the stormwater team training requirements. The old permit required training for anybody on the stormwater team, but this like clarifies and says this is what those people have to be trained on. And also clarified that changes to the construction schedule do not need to change the NOI. So if the dates of the construction changes in your SWIP, you don't have to file a change NOI form, says that specifically in the permit. And then they also updated in the appendix the Endangered Species Act eligibility procedures, because it's going from being a federal permit to a state permit. So that the requirements are slightly different, and they describe that in the permit. So a couple of things that were removed. The old permit had a requirement that you did inspect if you discharge to a sediment or nutrient impaired water or a high quality water. So like a tier 3 water body or tier 2 water body, one of those. So either it was air for those two things, or it was a high quality water. You had to do inspections every 7 days and after a rain event. And that's gone. And now it doesn't even have that option. It just says you can choose 7 days or 14 days and after rain. So it also, the old permit said that you were to do inspections after snow melt, and that's removed as well. I guess my opinion on that is like, I never had met anybody that could figure out how to do the snow melting inspections. It usually, I could imagine writing the permit and saying, yeah, well, the snow melts, and then you would test, but usually, especially where I live in southern Idaho, the snow melts slowly. Like what day is discharge occurring? It was really a hard thing to figure out how to comply with. So I was happy about that. They also completely removed the requirement for a historic property screening prior to filing the NOI. It just doesn't exist in the CGP. And so that's a really positive thing for some of our clients, because that was a real challenge sometimes. So the specificity, things that are more specific, they added to the operator definition, like who's eligible for coverage. One of the things that was added was that I'm just going to point out that this was always this way with the operational controller plan specifications. But now it says, and the specifications includes construction drawings and stormwater pollution prevention plans and any other plans. So they added some specificity that it includes all the plans, including the SWIP, could make you be an operator. So, and I don't know how that's going to go in the future. Like it raises a few more questions, but I got to be honest, I'm not sure how to interpret it completely. So if one person is doing the SWIP plan and one person is,
Hi, this is Jack. Sorry, I can't come to the phone right now. Leave me your name and your number. I'll call you back as soon as I can.
maybe
An email, jjadams@tcco.com. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
At the tone, please record
Could
your
everybody
message.
please
When you
make
finish
sure they're
recording,
muted
you may
on their
hang up or press
devices?
1
Thank
for
you.
more options.
I don't
Hey
think
Jack, this is Troy Modi, just returning your call.
Can everybody please mute?
Yeah, I'm in and out of the office, but
there we go. That's better. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how to interpret this. I'm not sure, how. I think the key here is operational control over the construction plan specifications, like who has the control over the prevailing documents there, and maybe not just because it leads to like, well, what if the inspector updates the SWIP plan? Are they considered an operator? And I don't think that was the intent, because that would be kind of ridiculous. But I think somebody with operational control over the plan is what they're talking about. So specificity again, we're going back to the perimeter controls. It says install the sediment controls along any perimeter areas of the site that are downslope from exposed soil, just disturbed areas. And then it says it has to be installed upgrading to the natural buffers that we already talked about. It used to say install sediment controls along any perimeter areas that will receive pollutant discharges. And so from a construction site, most of your pollutants would come from bare soil. So this makes the logical change and makes it a lot easier to understand for anyone who might just pick up the permit. So some training requirements, these are new things now that was added. So the training requirements, it gives you two options in Idaho. One is to do the EPA course. The EPA's website says that they're expected to late summer 2022, this would be available, not available yet. The other option is a local training, and it doesn't really specify which local training in Idaho, it just says local training, and it gives these three requirements. And these are summarized. You might want to go to the permit and look at specifically what it says, but that's, you got to know in the training has to cover the principles and practices of erosion sediment control, has to cover design, installation, and maintenance of erosion controls and sediment control BMPs. And then the class needs to cover performance, how to perform an inspection, and how to complete the inspection reporting. And so, yeah, there's a lot of trainings around Idaho. It's pretty, it's a little disjointed. There's lots of city trainings and stuff like that, but what they're saying is, if it includes these three things, then you could accept that training as you receive proper training to be covered. So anyone on the stormwater team has to be trained, and it says specifically that they could train other people. They could train the inspector, say, as long as they are working together and you document that. So other things to specify specificity, that you have to check for sediment at the points of discharge. And then they clarified that if it's occurring, if a discharge is occurring while you're on the site, then you have to do a visual quality check of the discharge. You have to record that. And then it gives you some things that you have to record. And if you've ever done MSGP inspections, this is basically a visual site assessment. It's exactly what the MSGP permit says, the federal one anyway. And so you check for color, odor, floating, settled, suspended solids, foam, oil sheen, and then they added or other indicators of pollutants. And so this wasn't in the permit before, and possibly you would check for this kind of stuff because it said you had to document the quality of the water if there's a discharge occurring, but it didn't really give any specifics. The old permit was the same, I believe, but it was hard to understand. And so they specified that you have to perform maintenance. If you find routine maintenance to do, you have to do that maintenance by the end of the next business day. So by the end of the following day after you found it. And which is good because it gives you a deadline, right? And then if it's not completed by the end of the next business day, then it has to be a corrective action. Where the old permit just kind of said, you have to do this maintenance and you have to do it within 24 hours and just kind of left it. And then you go back to the corrective action part of the permit. And then it said, anything beyond routine maintenance. So you had to kind of infer that by not meeting that deadline, it was a corrective action, where they specifically just said it in the permit, which is helpful to anybody, I think. So the biggest change in this permit is dewatering. And it's spelled out in, well, at least there's these 5 areas are the biggest areas where it talks about it in the permit that I have listed on the top of here. So I'll go through some of those as a summary, but there's pages and pages of stuff to do with your dewatering. And the federal permit does a very similar thing, the new one. This is just kind of specific to Idaho. There's a lot of small things that are different from what the federal permit said, but anyway, this is what they added. The dewater section 2.4 is very similar to the old section 2 of the 2017 CGP, but it basically gives guidelines for if you're doing dewatering, but it's not the same as it used to be, but it's very, very similar in that these things are not to be discharged and you have to do monitoring. And so then we go to section 3.3 is the place where it talks about the more specifically, like while you're dewatering, here's what you have to do and the monitoring. And so it's a whole page or page and a half. I'm just trying to summarize here the important parts. But I highly recommend if somebody's dewatering, you should read at least the section 3.3 and the sections 4 about it, because the section 4 is about inspections. And so it gives you the specifics about what you have to record for the inspection. And 3.3 is the water quality standard that you have to meet. And I find it interesting. This was in section 9.7 of the 2017. So if you're not from Idaho, it was in there, but it's been changed. It's not the same as it used to be. So anyway. You have to use a calibrated turbidity meter. You can take it to a lab or on site. Doesn't it gives both options. But you have to take at least one turbidity sample from the dewatering discharge after the treatment process, but before mixing with the receiving water. See, the old permit said you had to test it within the visible plume. Like, so if you had a visible plume in the receiving water, that's where you tested. This says before it even meets the receiving water, you have to take the sample. So that's a change. You have to take at least one sample every day that you have a discharge from dewatering. And you have to meet the criteria, which is, so you take a sample, what I left out, you take a sample upstream of the work area, and that's your background. So you take the sample in the receiving water. And so then you compare that to your discharge. And so you have to be under 50 NTUs instantaneously above the background of the receiving water. And if you met that criteria, then you have to meet the criteria that for the average of 10 consecutive days or 10 calendar days, then your results have to be under 25 NTU above the background. So that's our turbidity standard. It's been, that part of it has been here for a long time, but they changed where to sample, and that you used to sample only if you saw a visible plume, but now you have to sample every day, at least once. So other requirements, if the criteria is not met, then you have to stop the discharge, implement corrective actions if there's no background. So you're going into a storm drain, the storm drain goes to the Waters of the United States. Or it's a Waters of the United States that some Waters of the United States don't run year round, so you have no background, right? Then you have to assume that the background turbidity is 0, which is, I don't know, I did this a lot anyway because you have no background turbidity. So the best way to prove that you're compliant is to assume that it's 0, because there's no way to argue with that. So this is maybe a change because it's written in the permit now, but I think a lot of people just did that inherently because there's no other way to prove that you were under the background. And what do you have to maintain? Well, you have to have your calibration records, the date, place of the monitoring. So it's the way that this is described, and it has here's the monitoring was done at this date and this time, and then the analysis was done. So it's kind of set up for taking it to a lab the way that they're describing it. But certainly if you took the test out the site, then the analysis and the monitoring sample taken, it's going to be the same. So yeah, and then you have to record the results, and those have to be kept in your SWPPP. So any time that the DEQ wants to review that, they need to have that available. You have to keep logs as well about dates when you observe visible plume. You have to keep notes about the effectiveness of the BMPs. If you stop dewatering and start dewatering again, then you have to keep logs of when you started and stopped the dewatering. So maybe you do it for a couple of days, then stop, and then do it for a couple of days. That needs to be recorded. And then they have a requirement that you submit the turbidity monitoring reports, those results of the monitoring with your notice of termination. So haven't done that yet. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, just they want the DEQ, we asked like why, and they said, well, we want to be able to kind of get a feel for how the monitoring is going throughout the state, and that we can look at the records and see how people are complying and what works. So so we go into the inspection section now, and then it has more requirements in these different parts of section 4. And it says during dewatering, you must conduct an inspection once each day. So there's the way that the permit's written, it makes it sound like there's monitoring and then there's an inspection. There are two different things. And so you have your monitoring results, your test results, and your calibration logs and stuff. And you have your inspection where you're like, hey, this BMP is out of place. This thing's full of sediment. That, those kind of notes. So, and then you have to include in your inspection, your stormwater controls that you're using to treat dewatering discharge. And any place you have channelized flow, it specifically talks about inspecting those areas as part of the dewatering inspection. So daily test and daily inspection for any dewatering. And then there's specific things that have to be recorded in the inspections record. And so I guess I'm suggesting that possibly those two could be the same because they overlap in places. The requirements for the monitoring requirements record a record and the inspection record, some of the requirements overlap. So seems like you could do one record that includes all the requirements and then probably be okay. But so you have to record when you started dewatering and when you stop dewatering every day. A lot of times jobs I work on, they just pump continuously until they're done and then they shut the pump off because that's how you keep the water table down. But yeah, of course you would have to document that. So you have to estimate on the one thing that's we thought was kind of weird or we never really done before is estimate the rate of the flow in gallons per day, like how many gallons per day are you pumping? And so I don't know, probably some coordination with the contractor, pump specifications, those kind of things. I don't, a lot of dewatering jobs I've worked on over the years don't have like flow meters. So it's that, and I don't, from what it describes, it doesn't seem like it needs to be that accurate. So, but if you can know how much you're doing, then that'd be the way to go. So any visible sheen, any evidence of hydrocarbons, any visible plume, it has to be documented. And then of course your monitoring results have to be, it even says in this inspections part that your monitoring results need to be part of the inspection. So I figured that it's just one report you can find. So in 5.1.5 is the section on, section 5 is about corrective actions, and it specifically says that any discharge that exceeds the water quality standard are considered corrective action. So if you exceeded the 50 NTUs, you would have to write a corrective action report and then do corrective actions and then stop dewatering. And it gives some instructions about that to not work and things that we already covered. So then there's also a section about monitoring stormwater discharges separate from dewatering. So there's the dewatering discharges and then the stormwater discharges. So the dewatering was 3.3 and the stormwater discharges was section 3.4. It's very similar to the dewatering, but it makes a statement about storm event discharges only required, monitoring these only required when the site discharges into a water of the United States with no intervening conveyance systems or other intermediaries. So if you discharge into some ditch that's not waters of the United States and then it flows down to the waters of the United States, apparently then this requirement doesn't apply. Conduct turbidity monitoring during construction activities when there's a discharge of pollutants from the unstabilized portion of the site. So if you have a discharge flowing off, you have to test that. And it's, I think it's about, it says test this thing once a day and you stop work if the water quality standard is exceeded. Now it's very the monitoring requirement is very similar to the dewatering water quality standard with the 50 NTUs over the background and things. So yeah, that's not hard. Once you get one down, you can translate it into the other. They have a rain event inspections. It says once every 14 calendar days, I want you to say that there is a discharge from your site to a water of the US. And the change here is very subtle. They added the water of the US. So you could receive a 1/4 inch of rain and not have a discharge to the water US or not have a discharge. And so you really have to do the rain event inspection when there's a discharge. And maybe that doesn't make sense, but to us, the Southern Idaho, it's a desert. It's 10 to 13 inches of rain a year. The first rain event, sometimes in September, October, it's so dry that you can get a 1/4 inch of rain and it just is sucked up into the soil, and we never see runoff or running on any of our slopes either. They just absorbs that first rain event, and then it's a second one where everybody gets in big trouble. So that's possible. The old one just said occurrence of a storm event of 0.25 inches or greater and didn't include whether or not there was runoff. So another one they reference in this permit, the Idaho Administrative Code 580102-851, and our old permit didn't, it made references to lots of federal code which are still in this permit, but it also didn't really include this. And that section is about petroleum release reporting, investigation, and confirmation. Talks a lot about tanks and spills, so it gives you some specifics about what has to be reported. If there's a sheen on the water, if you can't clean it up in 24 hours, if it's more than, God, I can't remember now, 25 gallons. And it has some specific things about if you have an oil spill that has to be reported, what you have to report and stuff. It says to our DEQ, and it's pretty specific, and it wasn't really, I guess it's pretty specific. And if you're working in Idaho and you're not from Idaho, it might be something that you want to look at to know where to report those kind of things, because it's required. And yeah, the reporting requirements are pretty much the same. It used to say you have to notify the EPA and then the regional office of the DEQ. And the only thing that's changed is you report to the EPA or the DEQ, and it leaves out the EPA stuff because it's a state permit now. But yeah, that's a change. Some SWP requirements, the SWP requirements are very similar. There's some small nuances that I just didn't include because they're so small. How to explain all those? But you have to document the age and dates of structures that'll undergo demolition if the structure's built or remodeled before 1980. Then you have to make some documentation about PCBs. That's a change. It's very specific. We really in the old permit didn't have anything about PCBs, or it did, but it's not. This is very specific, and there's questions about it in the NOI system. You had to have it in your SWP and everything, but only if you're demolishing structures that were older. So it also includes a requirement to identify the specifications for each stormwater control, like what you're using, if they're manufacturer specifications, if they're details like on the slide there, maybe if they're, is it a BMP manual? Is it, something like that? How do you, what detail, what are you following to do these BMPs? So that's, maybe it was a requirement before, but it wasn't as specific. So, and also it talks about if you have to make amendments to the SWP, like say you get a new site plan or whatever, then those have to be done within 7 days. And it's I guess that's a kind of specific requirement. And obviously if you have a corrective action that requires that, you have to meet the corrective action deadlines and things like that too. But in this case, it's any updates to the SWP needs to be done within 7 days of understanding that there's an update. The appendices, there's a couple things added by the DEQ in the back of the SWP or the CGP, and it has a suggested format if you're going to use treatment chemicals on the site, and it has a little form to fill out. And then it has a suggested format for these turbidity monitoring records. And so you can use that. I think it's helpful about how to do those things. So really, if the changes aren't that big from the old permit, except for the dewatering, that's the big one. So, and if anybody has any questions, let me look at the chat here. More of a comment, I guess, that, yeah. Oh yeah, for whether a diversion of a stream is dewatering, and so would not trigger additional monitoring or inspection requirements that dewatering would. The CGP dewatering requirements are intended to capture pumping water out of excavations, and it's likely that such a diversion would need Army Corps permitting, and such permitting may be used. Yeah, so good comment. I like that. When will the permit be in place? I think that Scott, what you're talking about is the construction general permit is active right now. So if you're dewatering today, you would have to do daily inspections because it became active on February 10th and of this month. So yeah, if you're dewatering right now, you need to get out there, grab that inspection report. So.
Hey, Adam, Jesse Webb up here in District 2. Great presentation. Yeah. Thank you. Hey, anything on the under or over 5 acres of stabilization change from the EPA to this Idaho DEQ permit?
Yeah, the old permit had the 5 acres versus, so you had 5 acres or less and then greater than 5 acres. And those requirements are the same. it's really not any different at all. So just to recap, if you're 5 acres or less of disturbance, you have 14 days to complete your stabilization activities. If it's more than 5 acres, you have 7 days to complete your stabilization activities. And that's the same as the old permit. So, and about the 7 versus 14-day inspection schedules. So your options for inspections, if you're doing, construction site inspections, you do the inspections every, you get to choose. You do it every 7 days, and you just hit the same day every week without fail. It's not once a week, it's every 7 days. And then if you choose, then you can choose that you do the inspections every 14 days and after a rain event. And the rain event is a 1/4 inch of rain or greater. And so that's, so if you choose the 14-day schedule, you have to watch the weather. Because if you miss that it rained a 1/4 inch, that's not an excuse. You will have a violation of the permit because you didn't get the inspection done within 24 hours. So then to be specific about that, if it rains 1/4 inch within 24 hours, then you have to do your rain event inspection. And from the time that it hits 24 or, the 1/4 inch, or you realize it, say it's at night, then you have 24 hours to do that inspection. So then to measure that, you can use a rain gauge or a weather station, and you have to document what you're doing in the SWPPP and where the rain gauge is located or where the weather station. One thing that they kind of added, which is a little subtle, is that you have to include the address of the weather station, which it says the URL, but it also says the address, the physical location of that weather station that your URL is going to. So maybe that'll help somebody stay out of trouble.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah. What if you have a 1/4 inch of rain, but you don't have a discharge to water? So that's what I was pointing out, is that what it says in the rain events is, this is from that section of the CGP where it gives you the options of 7 and 14 days. And then it says once every 14 calendar days and each day there's a discharge from your site to water the US. And this is that section about the 1/4 inch of rain. So there could be a 1/4 inch of rain and no discharge. So you still have to do the inspections every 14 days, but if the 1/4 inch of rain did not result in a discharge, the way it's worded, you wouldn't have to do an inspection. Hope that helps, Matt. Oh yeah, the ESA water quality monitoring may have more requirements. That's true. Especially if you're working on a project with a 404 permit or something, then you need to be really careful, because this is just for a CGP and no other permitting. And so in Idaho, if somebody gets a 404 permit, like say for a bridge or some wetlands restoration or some stream bank work or boat dock or something, like you submit a joint permit to the Army Corps, and then that permit goes and gets reviewed by our Department of Water Resources and our DEQ. And so they can write a site-specific, what's it called, water quality certification for that project. And oftentimes those things say things like, you have to monitor anytime you're in the water, you have to monitor every hour. And that's pretty common. Or you have to monitor up 100, sometimes it even specific, like 100 feet upstream and 200 feet downstream of the in-water work. And it'll give much more specific, sometimes, requirements for when. And so that the once a day thing is the bare minimum. And then you got to watch out for other environmental permits, that's for sure. Any other questions?
And thanks again, Adam. This was very informative. I think it's very useful. And just a reminder, it will be posted on our YouTube channel, which can be accessed through our website. And that should be up in the next couple of days. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you guys have a good week. Thank you.